Hello everybody, Flik here, and since we're nearing the end of 2014, it is that time again. For a third year in a row, I'm going to go through the top 5 best and worst things that I played this year that were also released this year. And as with previous years, the same kind of rules I apply are once again in place. So you might be thinking, well, obviously the worst game released this year came out in November and it was the Sonic Boom game. Well, I didn't play that, so I'm not including it. It has to be things I have physically played. Other than that, I'm not including any DLC, I'm not including any free-to-play games because I don't think that's fair, no demos, and other than that, that's about it. So we're going to start. I hope you enjoy. Feel free to share your own lists of things you've played and either enjoyed or hated in the comment section below. And with that, yeah, let's get started. Enjoy. At number 5 on the best list is This War of Mine. So you might be quite familiar with This War of Mine even if you haven't played it, because currently, in fact by the time you hear this it's probably still going on, I'm doing a series on This War of Mine. I thoroughly enjoyed it, I received it for review, and I love how gritty it is and how it makes you challenge your ethics, I suppose, which is not for everybody. I am fully aware of that. This might be a bit of a weird choice for some people because it's technically not fun. This War of Mine is not a fun game, but maybe I'm burying the lead a little bit here. If you're not familiar with This War of Mine, it is a survival game. You're playing as a ragtag bunch of survivors hiding in a besieged city, and the idea is you must scavenge at night because you can't go out during the day because of snipers, and generally just survive. You have to manage your food, you have to manage wounds and sickness and warmth, and you have to build up your base to defend it against raiders, and at night you technically have to become a raider yourself, and you know, sometimes have to do questionable things if you want to survive. I mean, that's the thing that I like so much about This War of Mine. It's challenging how much you're willing to do to I was going to say win, but survive is probably the better way to put it. If you desperately need bandages, or one of your group is going to die come the next morning, are you willing to break into the house of an old couple, potentially even murder them, so that you can steal their stuff so that your own people can survive? That's the kind of situation This War of Mine puts you in. There's also a very infamous scene where you can stop a sexual assault happening, and I've found some other stuff in my playthrough that hopefully you've seen by now, so it's not much of a spoiler, but you can also find a group of psychopaths who like skin their victims, and if you want you can just stay well clear, you can just scavenge and run, or you can be the hero and find out they've actually been holding hostages and you can save them if you want. You might not get anything in return for that. It might have no payoff, no monetary or item payoff. It's just whether you want to try and be the hero or not, and if it's worth the risk, because technically you could argue that it's not worth the risk to put one of your people in danger for someone who you don't know. And that's the aspect of This War of Mine that appeals. I don't think it has as much replay value as I wish it did, because starts are generally very samey, and also there's a limit to the number of places you can visit and a limit to the number of events that can happen when you visit said places. But one playthrough will take you about 7 hours, maybe longer, assuming you survive, of course. You might have to restart if you're still learning the mechanics. And it is fun, it's a weird kind of fun. Moral games, or games with questionable decisions in it that matter, that actually matter, in other words not kind of like BioWare decisions as it were, they mean a lot to me. I compare it a little bit to Spec Up the Line, where it's not necessarily a very fun game to play, however I like the aspects of it, I like the undertone, and as long as you're willing to invest yourself in the game and don't stay distant, like definitely deliberately get yourself involved, give a rat's ass for the people you're trying to protect, treat them like they're your family, otherwise you'd be missing out. Although that said, it is still a pretty good survival game even if you don't care about the moral side of things, but that's the side that appealed to me, and that is the main reason why it has made this list. At number 4 on the best list is Dead Rising 3 Apocalypse Edition. Now this is probably as close to a controversial decision as I'm going to get in the best list anyway, because Dead Rising 3 was technically released in 2013 on the Xbone. However, the version I played, given that I don't have an Xbone, was the Apocalypse Edition, which was the Steam edition released earlier this year. It included all the DLC for free, and it was obviously ported to the PC, so I'm counting it as something that came out this year. You could argue that that shouldn't count. Now if you do fall into that camp, I offer as an alternative South Park: The Stick of Truth. That's another game I really enjoyed and almost put in this position. However, Dead Rising 3, I've played it through 3 times now. Once off camera when I bought it on release day on PC, once for the series I did on it, and then a third time with CR co-op for his Twitch channel and YouTube channel. And I really enjoyed every single playthrough. I was worried when Dead Rising 3 first got revealed, well, partly because it was an Xbox exclusive, but also that the new visual style was it looked very gritty and very serious, whereas the Dead Rising series, yeah, it kind of has serious moments, but it's all kind of B-movie serious. It's all comical technically. It's all parody and satire and nonsense. At least in Dead Rising 1 and 2 it was, so that worried me and a lot of people. So luckily then Capcom showed off pictures of, look, Servbot masks are still in Dead Rising 3. Stupid weapons like dildo launchers are still in Dead Rising 3. You can still dress up like a woman even though you're playing as a man if you want in Dead Rising 3. So I'm glad I bit the bullet, and when I saw that it was getting a PC release, I thought, yeah, I'll give it a go, because it has a great story, it is tremendously good fun to play. Even solo, co-op is better, but solo is just great fun. Slaughtering waves of zombies with ridiculous weapons like flaming swords or giant electric thunder hammers, or all the nonsense I was talking about earlier. There's tons of new weapons, and the story is actually good, which is weird. It ties together the story of Dead Rising 1 and 2 as well, and it puts a nice bow on it. It finishes everything that needs to be finished. If they never made another Dead Rising game, Dead Rising 3 finishes the story well, in a way that is satisfying. It kind of ties up most of the loose ends. And the acting is good, which helps a lot. I mean, I don't think the acting is necessarily an area which has to be amazing for a game like Dead Rising, or a series like Dead Rising. But yeah, I was pleased with pretty much all the actors. I love Nick's voice actor, does a really good job. Gary's voice actor does a really good job. You could argue some of the psychopaths are a bit ho-hum, kind of. But yeah, it's fun, and that is the main reason it's made this point in the list. However, I would also like to point out, because if you are only familiar with the game as a result of my coverage, you probably won't have heard most of the soundtrack because the music is down so low. The soundtrack is, I think deliberately so, a parody of the kind of music that's in George Romero's zombie movies, and that just tickles me in the right place, if you'll pardon that very weird wording. It's very similar to George Romero's type of music in his classic zombie movies, which I loved growing up, so that appeals to me on multiple levels, and it fits the theme of the kind of walking the line between serious and nonsense that is the place Dead Rising games should occupy. So I think they made a really good choice with the way they use music. They didn't do any real tracks, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but tracks with words done by like actual bands like they did for, say, all the psychopath fights in the first 2 games. They didn't really do that here, and I think their alternative was better. Now that might be a controversial decision in and of itself, or opinion rather, but yeah, I much prefer how they handled the music in this one as well. It was the right type of style to fit the theme of the game. So it is a shame that Dead Rising 3 started as an Xbox exclusive. However, I am classing the Steam release as a separate entity. The DLC technically adds value, although I'm not really considering that. I'm talking about just the base game. It's fun. I really liked it. And yeah, I still like zombie games even though there's like 5 of them released a month. Who cares? As long as you enjoy them, it doesn't matter to me. So that's why Dead Rising 3 is on this list. Let's move on. At number 3 on the best list is Dragon Age Inquisition. So I've played all of the Dragon Age games to date. I really loved Dragon Age Origins. I think it's probably one of the best Western RPGs there's ever been, quite frankly. Dragon Age 2, I do fall into the camp that kind of enjoyed it, but at the same time was very aware of how badly designed it was. They were really lazy with it. They had no real direction, and as many people point out, absolutely nothing you do makes a difference. You're still going towards the same one ending regardless of anything you do. And that means, depending on your own actions, some of the stuff that happens just makes no logical sense at all. So I was wary about getting Dragon Age Inquisition, especially because of the price gouging that was going on. However, I'm glad I did eventually decide to bite the bullet and trust in that series again, because Dragon Age Inquisition is probably the best RPG I've played this year. Not just a Western RPG, just flat out. It's the best RPG I've played this year. The breadth of it, the width of it, I don't know how to describe it. It's massive. and it's interesting. The world created by the Dragon Age games it's an interesting fantasy world. Yeah, they've got the stereotypes, you know, dwarves, and they're always bloody Scottish because dwarves always have to be Scottish. They've got elves, and the elves are always segregated, and they're always arrogant as a stereotypical personality. But they do build up on that. I like the combat, or the clash of ideals, I guess you could say, between mages and Templars, which kind of it's always been present, but it really took off in the second game, and it's still there in the third game as well, where Templars used to babysit, I guess you could say, mages, and force mages to live in towers because the temptation by demons was always there, and mages could fall to them at any second, so they always had to be watched. And it was either that or euthanize mages, and then they fought back. And that's kind of the situation as Dragon Age Inquisition begins. A peace treaty was trying to be drawn up between them. There's a catastrophic event, without going into any details, and your character's in the middle of it. You become the Inquisitor, and it's your job to kind of solve all the world's problems. And as you can probably see by the footage I captured in the background, the game looks amazing on PC. I can't comment on the console versions. I would hope that the PS4 version and Xbox versions look similar. But yeah, my god, is this game beautiful. It just is such a pleasure walking around all the environments in the game. It helps that the combat is also so visceral and over the top. It's a decision they made to kind of steer away from the Neverwinter Nights style of Dragon Age 1 into Dragon Age 2. They didn't do it quite as well in Dragon Age 2, I feel, but in Dragon Age Inquisition I think they've found a happy medium. I would have preferred the Dragon Age style, the original game, I feel. It's the more traditional style. But at the same time, I like just getting right in there with the combat in Dragon Age Inquisition and just wrecking the scenery as I do. And they've done a pretty good job, which is actually very hard to do, of making melee builds feel just as satisfying to like wreck face as mage builds. Now, you could argue that mages still seem like OP and, you know, very dramatic compared to melee builds, but I think they've done a good job of trying to make, you know, just flinging a big axe or sword around as satisfying as making meteors fall from the sky. They've tried, and the effort I can commend, at the very least. Now, other than the main character, the male lead, I can't speak for the female one at this time, the voice acting is fantastic, other than the male lead, who is distracting because of how unfit the voice is for the character, in my opinion. I think what they did was they found a voice that would fit when you get into the role of the Inquisitor, as in you're very hoity-toity, as they might say in the UK. But prior to you becoming the Inquisitor, it fits nothing you do, nothing you say. It doesn't fit the situation at all. So I'm not saying Dragon Age Inquisition is perfect. I'm just saying that despite flaws like that, and also, let's say, some of the side quests get a bit too MMO-y. So if you get easily drawn into kill 5 this, kill 10 this, collect 10 this, and bring it to so-and-so, you can get distracted away from what really matters, which is the main story, which is really interesting. Although, that said, if you ignore the generic MMO-esque side quests, there's some really, really deep side quests you can do in relation to your companions. And that's what BioWare are actually good at. They do still have good writers, as it turns out. So the characters you can recruit into the Inquisition are actually, they're fleshed out. They have interesting stories. Like, I thought Dorian was a dick because he was always acting like an arrogant arse. But then if you do his side quest, you actually find out there's a horrible, horrible reason he puts on this bravado and reason why he fled his home country. That made me see his character in a totally different light. It's like, oh right, you're doing this for that reason. I get it now. That's very depressing. So it's that kind of stuff that makes me enjoy Dragon Age Inquisition so much. It's great fun to play, and it has a good story. The other negative I would mention, and I feel like I do have to bring this up because I don't want to just sing this game's praises, is that it is new BioWare. None of the decisions you're making are going to make a blind bit of difference, and it doesn't even really try to make it feel like your decisions are significant. But despite of that, despite my hatred of arbitrary moral choices in BioWare games, Dragon Age Inquisition is still something I have thoroughly enjoyed playing. I haven't actually finished it yet, which is a bit bad because I would prefer to include games in this that I've finished at least once. But I'm already thinking ahead to my next character build and how I'm going to play through differently, what specialisation I'm going to go into, what decision about my fort I'm going to change to see what effect that has on things, who I'm going to bring with me, and how they're going to react with other people I bring with me. All these things I'm planning ahead because I'm eager to just lose many hours more into the world they've created. And you can fault them for a lot of things, but not this. Not at making a believable, interesting RPG fantasy world. It's definitely the best RPG I've played this year, and I do highly recommend it. So that is why Dragon Age Inquisition is on this list. Let's move on to the next one. At number 2 on the best list is The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. So this is probably going to come as no surprise given the amount of Binding of Isaac Rebirth content that I've put out on my channel since the launch on November 4th. I just really love this game. I loved the original. In fact, I was recently asked in my Let's Chat series if I could only play one game on a desert island for the rest of my life, what would it be? And I said The Binding of Isaac. Why? Because every run genuinely feels a little bit different. And you can craft all these different stories each run with different tactics, different random nature drops, different consumables, different everything. That it rarely gets tedious. Sometimes you might get angry, sure, if it kind of screws you over, as it has done to me many times. But the game itself is just, it's the quintessential roguelike, even though it technically isn't. And I don't want to get into any arguments about being roguelike, because that's just tedious. It plays differently every time. So by my standards, that makes it a roguelike, and it also makes it one of the absolute best. And the differences between the original release and Rebirth are significant enough that I actually prefer Rebirth by an order of magnitude compared to the original. It's hard to explain because it essentially is the same game. A lot of the items are the same. All that's really different is there's a few more bosses, a new visual style, and a few new items. But it still feels a bit more than that. It feels like it plays tighter. It feels like a lot more love has gone into it, a lot more thought. And it seems better than the original in every way. Not that there's anything wrong with the original, incidentally. It's just that if I was given the choice now between the two, I would still stick with Rebirth because I like the changes, I like the new characters, and I like all the designs. Sure, there's some new items that go along with some of the old items that are just terrible, but the game itself is just great. Now, if roguelikes aren't your style, or if you're put off by some of the crude humour or some of the grossness of the game, you know, you can shoot pee, you can shoot poo, you can have poo bombs and all this nonsense, you can use your mother's tampon as a weapon against your enemies. If you're put off by that kind of stuff, that is totally fine. The game isn't going to swing you because that's just the angle it's gone with. It started life as a Newsgrounds game, and you know, I think that's a hangover from that. It doesn't really bother me, but I would understand if it bothers some people. That said, I still can't really fault the game. Sure, they're patching it at the time of me recording this, and that's kind of breaking stuff that's pissing me off, but I'm willing to overlook that, and the fact I'm willing to overlook that, the fact I'm still eager to record more, or even if I wasn't doing a series on it, just play more, should be a testament to how good it is. Now if they, down the line, either with a patch or with the expansion they're working on, somehow get it so that the co-op of the game isn't just local, if it was online as well, that would have assured that this would have been at the #1 position for me, because it just looks so much fun playing a game I already love so damn much, co-op as well. But at the time of me saying this, it's local only, as expected with most indie games, to be honest. But still, Binding of Isaac Rebirth is one of the best things I've played this year, for sure, and I suspect I'll be playing it for a long time, whether I am doing videos on it or not. The original game was a game I played in my evenings to unwind, and I'm enjoying Rebirth even more. I mean, it's only been out since November 4th and I've already put in a ridiculous number of hours, and that is just a testament to the quality of a game it is. They have done a tremendous job with it, and that's why it's on this list. At number 1 on the best list is Dark Souls 2. So this probably surprises very few people that Dark Souls 2 is the best game that I've played this year. It's maybe a case of having low standards going in, I'm honestly not sure, and I can't really predict whether that is the case or not, but I did go in with fairly low standards, that is true. However, I don't think that's enough on its own to explain just how much fun I had playing Dark Souls 2 and how frequently I did. I played through the PS3 version by myself, and then I recorded a playthrough of it by myself, then I played through the PC version, and I played through the PC version again, co-op, and then I played through all the DLC and enjoyed that as well with good Rory and CR. Well, CR for the main game and then Rory for the DLC. and I am eager to play it through again once the I can't remember the name they're going with, but the quote-unquote Game of the Year edition is coming out next year. The game is just really, really good, and it's going to be hard to explain that, because I know that some diehard fans still prefer the original, which I did not like at all. But Dark Souls 2 is the most fun I've had this year in a action RPG, I would say. And putting it ahead of Rebirth was difficult, but I think I just enjoyed playing it more. I think Rebirth probably has more longevity, however Dark Souls 2 just caught me up in the Souls series again, all over again, from the original love that I had for Demon Souls. And that was a hard thing to do. So I assume that most people listening will be familiar with it, so I don't really need to set the scene, although I will say that the Dark Souls games make it very difficult to follow their plot, because they hide the plot in item descriptions and vague NPC discussions, and yeah, that bugs me as well. So if you have a problem with that, I'm with you. They make a bit more of an effort in Dark Souls 2 than they did in Dark Souls 1 to actually try and give you a purpose. You are afflicted with a curse, go cure the curse. That's a very simple goal, but at least it's outlined in the introduction. You've got a task, go cure yourself, go do whatever you want. The old ladies say, go here, you go there, and you're told by the Emerald Herald, go collect big souls and then go talk to the king, he'll cure you. There is story beats, and story beats are important to me because it gives you guidance that I feel was lacking in Dark Souls. It's like someone vaguely says in the original Dark Souls, ring 2 bells. Why? I mean, why? The Emerald Herald says you have to go speak to the king, but to do that you have to have a strong soul. Go kill strong souls so that your soul becomes stronger. That makes sense. I know what to do. Granted, I still have to kind of stumble around finding said large souls, but at least I have a goal in mind, and then I have a checkpoint like, oh, I've got the soul, so now I had to get to the castle. I go to the castle, oh, but the king's not there. The queen said go here. There's a trail, there's a breadcrumb trail, and it is small breadcrumbs, but at least you're being kind of led. But that's not all that makes Dark Souls 2 good, although it does make it better than the first one, in my opinion. I like that the gameplay is just incredibly satisfying. The difficulty is just right. It's challenging enough to put up roadblocks, but the roadblocks are not, well, New Game anyway, let's not talk about New Game Plus, they're generally not so big that you're going to be stuck for ages. Or even if you are, you can make use of the better, more functioning co-op to get some help. That said as well, I like that they gave less power to invaders in Dark Souls 2. I find the PvP aspect of the game tedious, so for me, making invasions more difficult in New Game is a very nice way of going easier on new players or players who aren't interested in that aspect, and then in New Game Plus kind of saying all bets are off, you could get invaded constantly. I'm okay with that. It goes easy on the people who just want to enjoy the game. And then when you get into the harder version, if you've liked the game enough to want to do New Game Plus, then fine, yeah, then the kid gloves come off, the bosses get harder, you get invaded more often, etc, etc. That's good progression in my opinion. The bosses themselves, I know some people complain because a lot of the bosses are hard because there's more than one enemy to fight rather than your one-on-one duels with some giant monster. I didn't mind. I actually thought the boss designs and the boss fights for the most part were exciting and enjoyable. Adequate challenge and insanely satisfying to defeat once you actually get through everything. Except Ancient Dragon. Except him. But let's not talk about him. But other than that, the fact the co-op works as well is a really good thing, because the co-op just did not function that well in Demon Souls or Dark Souls in my opinion. But that was, you know, them kind of working out the kinks as it were, so I'm glad they got it right and I hope they continue to do so. I like that there's more ways to play in the game that actually feel significantly different. I can play as like a two-handed build, or a single-handed sword and board, or miracles, or sorceries, or pyromancy, or spin to win spears like I did for one of my playthroughs, and all that nonsense. There's a lot of different ways to play. There doesn't feel like there's one particular build that you must play as if you want to do everything. It feels like everything will work to a certain extent, and that means that you're encouraged, or motivated perhaps, to kind of try a few different things. Try a dual wield build, try a sword and board, try magic mixed in with something else, try magic by itself. See what works for you, find a starting class that fits you. And it feels like there is more significance to the starting classes as well, though you could argue that, you know, essentially just starting gear more so than anything else, but still, I like that. And overall the game was just super enjoyable. As a final plus point, I would also like to point out that nothing in Dark Souls 2 compares to Bed of Chaos, which I think should give it just like 10 points extra right there and then. You could argue that it wasn't good enough compared to the first one. I would disagree, however, if you're a fan of the series, that is of course your opinion. But it's definitely the best thing I've played this year. I love it. I would never forget to recommend Dark Souls 2 down the line. It's probably going to make the top 10 best things ever list. It doesn't actually exist, that list, by the way, but if it was to exist, I imagine Dark Souls 2 would stay on it for many, many years to come. So, with that, that is the best list out of the way. And now we're going to move on to the worst list, which is possibly the more interesting list, if that's what you've been waiting for, to hear me moan about games I've hated this year. So let's get on with that then, shall we? At number 5 on the worst list is Elder Scrolls Online. How do you take an amazing franchise and make it bad? Well, if you look at Elder Scrolls Online, I think you have a perfect example of that happening. It takes everything good about the Elder Scrolls games, specifically say Oblivion onwards, Oblivion, Skyrim, maybe a bit of Morrowind, and adding MMO aspects, and it just makes it turn to crap. Now, you might argue that it's technically not fair to include this because I only played in the beta, not the actual final release. However, the reason I only played the beta and not the final release is because I was so disgusted by the beta. It was boring, it was tedious, and there was just no motivation for me at all to carry on playing beyond what I did. You take everything that's good about the previous games in the series and you make them bad. There was just some bizarre decisions as well, like for example, the worst one in my opinion, if you want to play as the Imperial class, you have to pre-order a special edition of the game, otherwise it's gone forever. Who in their right mind thought that was a good idea? I mean, I don't actually play as Imperials often, I usually play as Dark Elves, but I know plenty of people who like Imperials as a starting class, so you know, you better spend extra money, otherwise you're not getting access to them ever, which is just stupid. They also didn't make enough instances, which is a very bizarre mistake to make with an MMO because it's usually a good way to cut a corner. Areas where you're doing main quests can get cleared out by the players ahead of you, and then you'll miss out on XP and drops and whatnot because there's nothing for you to kill. This was especially true in the beta, and I imagine launch was even worse, where you just couldn't get anything done apart from going to your boss fight, which may or may not have been instanced. But the instances were just not, they should have been for you. And you might argue, well, why bother having an online MMO Elder Scrolls game if all you're going to do is instance everything into something for you and your group? Well, yeah, there's a reason for that, and that's why more MMOs are doing it these days. It's I think it's what it's called, I think it's 1 in a million syndrome, I think that's what people refer to it as. Your idea, your character is meant to be special in MMOs, but you're one of millions of people playing the same story. So you have to be very clever about how you make it appear like you are more important than you actually are. The way some MMOs do this is making you see different variants of the world even though you're walking next to someone who doesn't have your progress. Like say a castle got destroyed as part of the main story. If you're at that castle, you'll see it all wrecked. Someone walking right by you who hasn't done that quest yet will see the castle looking normal. It's not a big difference, but it makes you feel like there's a sense of progression and like something's happened that mattered. That also happens with instances. In instances you can make a whole bunch of stuff happen that no one else sees, so it doesn't matter to anyone other than you. It makes your character feel more significant in their role that they're playing in the game. But they've just got the balance all wrong in my opinion. The game being boring is definitely the biggest sin in my opinion. I found it tedious. The occasional quest did have some good writing and it had some reasonable voice acting, but there just was not enough for me to stay at any general level of interest in it. Even though I'm a MMO addict, I've been playing certain MMOs for years, so I usually find it very easy to get drawn into them. And you would think because of my love for the Elder Scrolls games that this would be a no-brainer. But no, they somehow managed to screw it up enough that I just wasn't interested in playing beyond the beta, and I would actively encourage people not to play it. It's boring. It's just boring. So with that, let's move on to the next game. At number 4 on the worst list is Lords of the Fallen. So I think this is probably going to be as controversial as my worst list gets, and please don't click away or immediately do some horrible comment just because I didn't like Lords of the Fallen. I'm freely going to admit that this is 100% a personal decision here. This is not me being a game reviewer and saying fundamentally this is what's wrong with Lords of the Fallen. This is me saying that for my personal tastes, Lords of the Fallen has some stuff that I just don't like and put me off playing. One thing I can't actually help, so let's cover that first of all. Shaky cam. It happens in a lot of games, and most of the time I'm totally fine with it. Every so often a game comes along where they have shaky cam when you sprint or when you're fighting, and I just can't play it because I get headaches or motion sickness. And it's very rare that this happens. However, the combat and the rolling and the laboured way the camera shakes anytime you make contact with an enemy or an enemy makes contact with you, I can't play it. It gives me a headache really, really quickly. It's almost like I'm playing a 3DS game. So that alone made me not really like Lords of the Fallen straight away. I couldn't enjoy the combat because of the shaky cam. And as far as I'm aware, there's no way to turn it off. But that is not all that I didn't like about the game. The story doesn't appear to make much sense from what I played of it, and the voice acting is god awful. But there's a stranger problem with Lords of the Fallen story. You do get moral decisions every so often, and I'm going to spoil a very, very early game one. In fact, I think it's the second one you get given. You're walking along, and then you get a cutscene of a lady kind of strangling a priest, almost like shaking him by the neck and then kind of bending him backwards over the wall that he's next to, and there's like a fatal drop beyond that. And then you get two decisions to pick. It's either drop him or don't drop him. And there's no context given for what those two decisions mean. Do they mean that I'm going to shout, "Oi, stop that," or am I going to shout, "Yeah, you should probably drop him"? So I picked the option that I thought meant, "Oh, you better leave him alone, don't you dare kill him." And what it actually was, the option for my character's going to just sit there and watch you kill that man. And I didn't understand that that's what was going to happen, because there's just not enough information in the choices you're given about what the actions or results of those actions will be. And that happened twice. The first decision I had to make wasn't so much, but one after that as well. And then I got like criticised by a character as part of the story, like, I regret letting you out of prison based on what you've done. It's like, bitch, it's not my fault. I didn't know that that lady was going to throw that guy off. I picked the option that I thought was going to save him. Be clear next time. It's not my fault, it's your fault. You could argue that's a small complaint as well. I assume none of these decisions will matter, although I'm never going to find out because I don't intend to finish the game. Another thing about the game, maybe I just didn't play it properly. I don't know. Is there a correct way to play it? The game so unashamedly mimics Dark Souls that I would have thought that quite a lot of people would either fall into the camps of, yes, it's more games similar to Dark Souls, we need more of these, let's play this. Or they'll fall into the camp of, why are you trying to steal ideas from a company that does things better than you? Bad. I mean, Lords of the Fallen it's a Dark Souls clone. It is. There's not a lot of games that are genuine clones of Dark Souls, so you could argue that having more of that type is a good thing. And maybe for a certain extent, or to a certain extent, you're correct. Lords of the Fallen for me did not capture my interest in the way the Dark Souls 2 did by any stretch of the imagination. It's got worse acting, it's got worse gameplay. It looks better. That is without a doubt true. It is a very pretty game. That's the one compliment I can pay it. It also has a very interesting feature in the case of challenge areas. After you clear an area, you can open up these gateways to do like challenge rooms for extra gear. And yeah, that's an interesting concept. I also like the concept of when you die, you don't leave behind your souls, you know, Dark Souls style, you leave behind your XP. And if you take too long to get to it, the XP you left behind will degrade. But if you get to your XP and don't pick it up, you get a buff while you're near it. And that's an interesting feature as well. I liked certain aspects of what they were trying to do to change the formula, but they didn't do enough. Other than that, your combat is generally, you know, you block an enemy's attack and then you attack. So that's where my other problem comes in. Apparently poise is a thing in the game. There is a poise stat. However, I noticed that regardless of how much damage is being done to you, if an enemy hits you mid-swing, you will always cancel your swing. So poise didn't seem to matter. At least, maybe it only applies when you're blocking, but that's very stupid. Because I was playing as the big heavy warrior guy of the three classes available, which are very stereotypical, and there's not much leeway as far as I could tell for how they play. But I was playing as the big badass warrior with really heavy armor, which meant I didn't have much stamina, so I couldn't roll. I have to block and then swing my sword like once and then get knackered. So when I swing that one time I'm allowed, I better make sure I make contact with the enemy, but if the enemy just jabs me a little bit for like 10 damage, oh, I've lost my attack. I'll have to back off and wait for my stamina to regen. The combat is so laborious that it bored me. I just didn't like the combat. It was too tedious, too slow, too shaky cam every time I'm moving around, that I couldn't play it and I couldn't enjoy it. I can understand why people will like this game, if you can get past that. If you don't mind that the combat is so tedious compared to Dark Souls, if you like the visual styles, and the visuals are good, if you prefer streamlined weapon types and magic types, although I will say the magic is really, really bad in Lords of the Fallen. But maybe it is for you. It definitely was not for me. And I can't say much more than that. I'm almost apologetic for the fact that this is in my list. And I shouldn't be, because games are just a personal taste, whether you like a game or hate a game. It's all down to what you prefer. Lords of the Fallen was a collection of things that I didn't like. And as one more negative, I would just like to mention that I forgot to mention earlier, the enemy designs are all way too samey, and the bosses I fought were all essentially the same boss fight with a gimmick. A new gimmick every time. Like the first boss, no, it's just a straight up fight. Second boss, it's the straight up fight again, except this time he sometimes shields himself. Third time, oh, it's the same fight again, except this time you have to hide in a certain bit when he does a certain attack, or you get one shot. And that's the progression of the bosses. No imagination. They saw Dark Souls 2 popularity and thought, let's do that. And they did. And to a certain extent, in my opinion, they failed in the areas that made Dark Souls 2 my favourite game this year. So yeah, that is Lords of the Fallen. That is why I don't like it. I understand why people do like it, so please don't hate on me too much for liking something or disliking something you like. And let's quickly move on to the next game. At number 3 on the worst list is Watch Dogs. So I feel like after that long explanation of why Lords of the Fallen is in my worst list, I don't think I really need to do any big explanation as to why Watch Dogs is here, right? Watch Dogs has you playing as Aiden Pierce, a vigilante who is after revenge for the death of one of his, I think it was his niece, I can't even remember now. And it's a Ubisoft game. There's a fantastic parody of Watch Dogs called The Review of Ubisoft Game, where you can use the same review to describe any game Ubisoft has made in the last few years, and it applies most to Watch Dogs. The easily branded clothing the main character wears, the very tedious Batman-esque voice he talks in for no goddamn reason, the unlikability of him. You play as an absolute arse in Watch Dogs. Aiden Pierce is a dick, and that's one of the main off-putting points for me. He steals from anybody for no reason. You don't really need money in the game for anything significant, so you can just hack people's phones. Why? Because you can. And then you can perv their personal details for a quick joke, which is, you know, to a certain extent funny. But there's no redeeming qualities of Aiden Pierce. Nothing he does matters, really. Even to his own personal story, it has no satisfying payoff. And what's really bad, and comes back to the Ubisoft review again, is the game is filled with shit. There's a lot of stuff to do, but none of it is worth doing. And that's really, really bad. So if you have played Watch Dogs, I think you'll probably have done what I did, which is ignore most of the guff on the side for the most part and just stick to the story. You might get a bit of enjoyment out of some of the story missions, and then it's over with, it's done. The hacking the city aspects of the game I think were very innovative and probably not utilised to the fullest. But yeah, that was a fun side of things. But everything else, the radio shows that are just song after song without actually being a radio, and they're all like painfully connected to the story. The tedious voice acting, Aiden Pierce in particular, is his Batman voice. It's just, I really wish I didn't do that as well because I have a sore throat. But yeah, his Batman voice is, I found it funny, and like during serious scenes when he's talking like that, I just started laughing. So it's almost worth playing just for an example of generic Ubisoft game, and then you don't need to play another Ubisoft game for a few years until they realise that they need to change the formula of making lots of teams work on one game, so that what you have at the end is this mishmash of shit that Watch Dogs turned out to be. It's just, it's boring, it's got unlikable characters, it's got too much to do that none of it is interesting. Its main story might make it worth the ticket price for admission, so to speak, but that is a long shot, a really big long shot. So I don't think I really need to talk any more about this game. I think everybody will not have a problem with Watch Dogs being on my worst list. It's a Ubisoft game. At number 2 on the worst list is Transformers Rise of the Dark Spark. So the High Moon Transformers games of recent years, War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron, have been among some of the best third-person action games I've played. It helps that I'm a Transformers fanboy, so I will find some base level of enjoyment in a Transformers game even if it's bad, which is the only reason that I kept with Rise of the Dark Spark and did a full playthrough. But it's by a sub-company that took all of the assets of High Moon's game and then combined it with their own cheaply rushed bullshit for the Michael Bay era of Transformers and then mashed the two together, so you've got the parody of the 80s version paired with stages set in the Bay universe that make absolutely no sense because they do not conjoin it in any logical way. Why? To cash into the newest bad movie, that's why. But I still played it, and of the parts of the game I enjoyed, the bits made by High Moon, all their assets, the stuff set on Cybertron before the war, that's all the fun bits. The worst bits are definitely the bits set in the Michael Bay universe because they're so empty, so badly made, they look god-awful. And they're obviously the assets rushed to put into the game. I hope that High Moon are making a separate game and that they'll do a good job because they've been doing a sterling job so far. But this, I don't remember if it was handed off to a third party or if it was actually them handling this. But they obviously didn't have a big time frame because movie game tie-ins never do. And Rise of the Dark Spark is terrible as a result. It plays well, I suppose you could say, but it looks awful. The story makes no damn sense. There is no real point of them linking the old games to this new universe. They should have just made a, rushed, crappy Michael Bay universe game like they did for the last one that I played through as well and didn't really like either. But yeah, this kind of has ruined my mood for the High Moon games, and I think you'll remember in my last video last year, Fall of Cybertron did make it into my best list because it was fantastic. It was an amazing single-player third-person action experience, even if you don't like Transformers. So for this to be the next game to follow after that success, it's sad. It's a shame that we're left with this badly put together, bad tie-in to a bad movie that's sullied the name of the Transformers games that High Moon have created to date. So yeah, that is why Transformers Rise of the Dark Spark is on this list, and I think most of the immense dissatisfaction I've had for it is due to me being a Transformers fan. I think if I wasn't a Transformers fan and just played it and thought, hey, this is pretty bad, it would be lower on the list or maybe not even make a top 10 worst list. It's this high because of my fandom, my childhood of loving Transformers and becoming an adult and still being into Transformers and the good games that came out in prior years, to then be left with this dissatisfaction warrants where I've put this game, I think. And with that, let's move on to the final game. At number 1 on the worst things I've played in 2014 is Destiny. Destiny is a terrible game. Alright, we're done here. See you later. No, we're not. Destiny is, though, it is a perfect example of arrogance. Of Bungie's arrogance that they think they can produce any old shit and have it sell and be well received. Destiny is the worst thing I've played this year. Without a question, it is just the worst thing. And it's boring and tedious, but it's so bland to the point of actually being insulting that Bungie thought it was acceptable to release this pile of shit. I'm actually angry about how bland this is. Bungie did good things with Halo. That is true, I will admit that. And then they thought they could do it again, but without any of the lore or the flavour or the fluff, as they say, that made the Halo universe interesting. What you have in Destiny is the equivalent of a plain white room. It's just there's nothing in it, and what is in it, the walls, there's nothing interesting to look at or see or do or hear. And it's just a collection of really bad decisions. And what's amazing is Destiny is the most expensive game ever created. I would love to know what percentage of that budget was advertising, because it certainly didn't go into making the fucking game. The game is awful. And what you're seeing in the background is some gameplay I recorded back when I was playing the game. I was trying my hardest to make it look remotely interesting, deliberately so, because what you have, really, in the game itself is nothing like that. So, you might be saying, well, it's your own fault for buying into the hype and buying Destiny. I didn't listen to any of the hype. The only reason I bought Destiny was because I tried the beta. And what I thought I was getting when I played the beta was, you know, the first 4 missions or so, so I was getting a little bit of a flavour. I was getting a taste of the main meal, and that the full game would build upon this and be better and better and better and better. What I actually got in the beta was Destiny. I got what Destiny was repeated 10 times over in an hour. You could play the hour of the beta and you will just repeat that same hour over and over and over for the rest of the game. And the worst things are that you'll do this and it feels so unsatisfying. The weapons are boring, your character designs just look like they're made to, you know, be similar to Spartans, but, you know, just different enough that they can sell some action figures. And what you're doing, I actually have no idea what you're doing. There's a traveller, he's wounded apparently, and then you get Ghost, who's voiced by Peter Dinklage, who does a really terrible job at it, might I add. And he kind of leads you to some stuff. You kill a lot of aliens because reasons. You occasionally have to defend a point, and then that's it. And then you get to this stage where you have to break into this garden, without going into too much details in case you care about what little story there is in Destiny. Then you break into this garden, eventually, and then you fight this really, really bad boss fight. And then you think, oh, well, maybe the story's really going to get started now. We've freed the Traveller, maybe he's going to do something amazing, and we've got to go fight the aliens' homeworld, or fight the darkness in its very self. No, the game ends there. That's the actual ending. I didn't realise I was fighting the last boss, or watching the ending until the credits rolled. There was nothing in the story. There was absolutely nothing. Nothing you did mattered. You are never told enough, and you're never given enough to actually care about what's going on. And then it just ends. Bungie have never been good at boss fights. Never, ever, ever. And Destiny is just a prime example of that. They are terrible. Also, all the missions fall into one of 3 categories. You go somewhere, you shoot things until they die, or you go somewhere and defend and then shoot things until they die, and then save the thing you were defending and then leave. Every mission in Destiny is that repeated. It is boring. It has a terrible lack of content. And don't you dare say that 20 quid DLC packs, of which there is multiple, make up for that fact. That is an insult. That is them punching you in the face and you smiling as they do it. Do not think that that counts. It does not. The game being so tedious and lacking imagination is the main reason why Destiny is the worst thing I've played this year. I find it insulting that it is so bland and so lifeless, and just it's a white piece of paper with nothing drawn on it. It's terrible, and I would always say never play Destiny. Not even if you're curious. If you're curious to see how bad a job they did, watch someone else play it. Do not buy it. It's I suppose I'm not being fair by mentioning any plus points, so let's kind of balance that a little. The game looks good. The game does look good. I'm speaking out of bitterness because I feel like I was almost tricked. I feel like, even though I didn't even read any of the hype or see any of the trailers or, you know, E3 presentations, etc., etc., I feel like I was still tricked by the beta because I was expecting so much more. I was having this weird sci-fi world set up for me, you know, this big traveller that's wounded and fighting off the darkness, and he can't do it anymore, so you've got to help. Oh, where is this going? This could go into like some really interesting places. It goes nowhere. I still don't know what any of the things I did in any of the main missions meant. I have no idea, and I'm not just saying that to try and slander the game. I genuinely have no idea. I understand why we were trying to get into the ones where we were getting into the garden, because, you know, the steps were, you do this to get into the garden. Fine, we'll do that. Why was I doing that? I don't really remember. And all the stuff prior to that, it seemed like I was doing nothing. I was talking earlier in this video about the 1 in a million syndrome that MMOs have. And it's weird that Destiny doesn't even seem to address this, despite being quasi-MMO, because other players can kind of spawn in around you, except when there's instance areas for story missions. And it just feels so empty and nothing. There's just nothing there. Destiny itself is just a big pile of darkness with nothing distinguishable at all. It looks pretty, yes, and since the combat is essentially a copy-paste from Halo, the game controls well. On a controller, Bungie is probably the best for getting that right. Movement in vehicles, movement in shooting, etc, etc. They do console FPS well, and they can make it look pretty now, obviously. But they're up their own arses when it comes to story, and when it comes to what they think players need, because they haven't got a clue, and Destiny is a prime example of that. There are very similar to how Steam is with Half-Life 2 in my opinion, which is a game I also didn't like because I think it didn't give the player enough, and they were very arrogant about how they approached the storyline of that game. They think they know better, they do not, and as a result, Destiny ended up being a terrible, terrible mess. It is without a doubt the worst thing I played this year. Yes, there is also the PvP aspect. I haven't personally tried it because it doesn't interest me. I have heard on the grapevine that it is a broken mess, where you can farm for items and then dominate because you have better items than the next person who's not willing to sink in 40 hours doing the same raid over and over again because they have better things to do, quite frankly. So I think I've probably said enough about Destiny. Lazy, bland to the point of being insulting, just to reiterate that fact, because I think that is the most important thing to take away from this. Destiny is technically not bad. From a story perspective, from an everything else perspective though, it is bland to the point of being insulting. And that's the reason why I despise it so very much. There is no redeeming factors, unless all you care about is a pretty game. It doesn't even have good music, or good voice acting. But, I think the people that do enjoy it will be the ones who, for whatever reason, like the PvP aspect. I can't speak for that, it's not my bag, so maybe you can warrant spending 50 quid on that and then, 4 DLC packs for 20 quid each just for the PvP stuff. I think you're insane if you do that, but maybe you enjoy it. I also didn't play it through with friends, and maybe that saves it somewhat because you can just talk about stuff nothing to do with the game because there's nothing in the game while you play. You can just turn your brain off and shoot things and not even care. Maybe that's what some people are looking for, but that is not what I'm looking for. An FPS can and should make an effort in areas like story, sound, voice acting, music, etc. All that stuff. Destiny doesn't. Destiny is a bland mess that I wish I hadn't played, I wish I hadn't bought. And it is the worst thing I've played in 2014. And with that, I will once again thank you for listening. If you have listened this long, please feel free to share your own lists of some of the games you've played this year that you either loved or hated or whatever else. Or if you want to share some comments on some of the things in my list, that's totally fine too. And with that, I will say thank you very much once again. Stay tuned for more gaming stuff. Have a good Christmas and New Year, depending on when this is posted. And ta-ta for now.